Hey there, I'm Jan. I will talk about how to do a good seminar. This is essentially a collection of hints for you that you really need to look at that will help you, do a good seminar. It's not in any way a step-by-step guide or anything. It's just, things that you really need to know. So let's start with some technical hints and some resources that you should know about. The first question is usually, okay, what kind of software do I use? And the first category of this is where you need to write your seminar essay somehow. For that, we usually prefer LaTeX. It's essentially the de facto standard for theoretical computer science papers. So I've not seen a paper in a while that's not written, not any good paper that's written in Word or anything. They're all just LaTeX. And LaTeX is especially good for like handling formulas and many definitions and stuff. So for the more technical essays, definitely go for LaTeX. But for all the other essays, essentially just use it too. The second thing you need is a presentation software. There's also a LaTeX solution for that. That's great for more technical talks. So if you have many formulas, you can essentially use your LaTeX essay formulas that you already have, and now let's copy paste them into LaTeX Beamer. Then in the end, you will get a PDF for presentation slides. But for this, there's some variety that you can apply to. So you can also use PowerPoint or Keynote or any of these other softwares. So for example, PowerPoint and Keynote, they definitely also support formulas. It's just somewhat more difficult to input them. So if you have a lot of them, then it's not a fun experience. However, PowerPoint and Keynote have the advantage that you can easily have animations in there, and you can easily like draw some pictures in this, which makes it easy to explain more architectural things or more high-level explanation, which is always, for talk or presentation, this is always a good thing. So for the presentation software, you can choose depending on what style of presentation you want to hold. We have templates for all of these on our website, so you can essentially use that. You don't necessarily have to, but it's probably easier if you do. This goes for all of this, so these are all just recommendations. In theory, you can do whatever you like. But yeah, we have some experience with this, so this is what we recommend. So all of you already have like a paper assigned that you should take a closer look at for your essay. And then one thing that is probably going to happen is that you don't know some concept that is mentioned in this paper. And for that, we would actually recommend just Googling this or using Wikipedia for it. So let's say the paper mentions that they use FHE, and you have no clue what that is supposed to be. You can easily Google it or or just read the Wikipedia article on it. Then this is like a great way to get an overview of the basic knowledge that you need in order to like have a chance of understanding this paper. However, from my experience, Wikipedia or Google, for that matter, is not that great for more advanced research. So as soon as you get into the nitty-gritty details, or you need more precise definitions, then oftentimes Wikipedia is not that great, at least for cryptography papers. And in addition to this, while Google and Wikipedia are a great way to get a sense of what some concepts are, you shouldn't cite them in your essay. Instead, use probably peer-reviewed sources that you can cite. It's often the case that Wikipedia actually cites some papers, some sources themselves, and it's always a good idea to take a look at those and maybe cite those if you need to. But generally, for citing stuff, try, for the most topics at least, try to stay within like the realm of scientific papers to cite from. Which brings us to the next question is, how do you find scientific papers? And one great resource for this is actually Google Scholar, which is basically the Google search engine for academic papers. It is often the case that papers are restricted from public access, so they will probably ask you to pay some fee in order to access it. The university has a deal with many of these publishers, so that if you are in the university network, then you can access many of those papers for free. So if you want to do this from home, I would suggest you set up a VPN. The details for this are somewhere on the university website. Then what you need to know is the conference papers are often incomplete. Authors for our conference papers have usually a lot of content and very strict page limits, so they leave out some stuff. So, for example, proofs are often left out. However, some authors will actually go the extra mile and they will publish full versions of their paper that are freely accessible on, for example, archive.org or ePrint. And this is great for two reasons. The first one is that these are free to access, so you don't need to pay anything and you don't need to be in the university network. And they're usually more complete, so they will have all of the proofs that they couldn't fit into the conference paper. Finally, all of these are basically ways of finding resources. So finding conference papers or finding full versions of conference papers in order to read them, essentially. If you do want to cite them in your essay, I would recommend to go to dblp.org, which is a great database of essentially all of the computer science papers that exist. And they have a great export function in order to give you the BibTeX entry. And BibTeX is the thing that we use in LaTeX in order to do bibliographies. So it's a pretty easy way. You can essentially go to dblp, copy-paste the BibTeX entry into your file, and then you can reference it in your essay document. You can also get BibTeX entries from Google Scholar. So now that you know how to find sources, how do you work with them? And the first thing that we need to talk about is plagiarism, which is essentially the worst way of working with sources. So what is plagiarism? So one definition of it that I kind of like is to plagiarize something means to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own. So to use another's production without crediting the source. And the important thing here is that this doesn't just talk about the words of someone else. So it doesn't just talk about copy-pasting something verbatim from some other paper into yours, but it talks about the ideas. So in particular, if you don't use a single word from the original paper, but you just rephrase their ideas without giving them credit, it is still plagiarism. The punishment for plagiarism is severe, and the solution is actually pretty simple. Just cite the sources that you're using. How do you cite sources? Well, I'll give you a few examples of how we usually do it. In computer science, it's a little bit less strict than in many other disciplines, I guess. So let's say you're writing a literature overview. And then you may write something like, in 2018, Goldwasser et al. Proved that P is a subset of NP, for this example. Then the way of giving them credit for this would just be to add this small tag here, which will later appear in your bibliography referencing this paper. So these are the initials of the authors and then the year that it appeared. We don't necessarily insist on any particular citation style, so often this is also just a number, but I kind of like this one because it's way easier to remember what this paper is. So if you see GFG 97 lots of times, then you will always just remember, that's this Goldwasser paper. And then there are some other ways of citing this. So if you're just using facts of other papers in order to argue for something, then you can just, when you use this fact, just put the citation mark after this. If you're restating parts of the paper, then like in this theorem 3 that you have here, if this theorem is taken from some other paper, just reference the theorem in this paper, in like the theorem name, I guess. And it's okay then to just keep the theorem formulation unchanged. So this is important to remember. It's not like you have to rephrase everything that you take from somewhere. If it's already like perfectly phrased and like this theorem is kind of hard to phrase differently, then it's fine to keep it unchanged. The other thing that you need to know is that it's not like you have to, after every sentence you write, you have to do a citation of where you got this idea. But you can cite more broadly. So let's say you're writing this section here on set theoretical relations, and then you can just start this section by saying, okay, here we take a look at the subset relation, and all of this is kind of taken from this paper. And then afterwards, you don't have to necessarily mention the source that often anymore, because people would assume that this is already taken from the source. So essentially, don't overdo it. You don't have to have 3,000 citation marks in your essay. Just make sure that everyone is always aware what ideas are yours and what ideas you have taken from somewhere else. And then all of these citation marks that you have here, they correspond to something in your bibliography, which will then look something like this. So after your whole paper, there's this bibliography section, which is automatically generated by LaTeX if you do it correctly. And then, this tag just appears here, and it will list the authors, the title, the conference, and the proceedings that it appeared in. So let's talk a little bit more about how to cite properly. And there are a bunch of unusual or unnecessary citations. So one thing that basically people don't do at all, or very, very rarely, is that they do direct quotes. So let's say GFG 97 wrote this sentence here that the proof boils down to showing that every deterministic Turing machine can be converted to an equivalent non-deterministic Turing machine. Then usually you wouldn't write this sentence into your essay and just cite it in a direct quotation. So to be clear, this would be fine for preventing plagiarism because you cited this thing and you put it in direct quotations so that everyone knows, hey, these are not my words, I took it from this paper. So this is fine. It's just unusual and it's kind of bad style because essentially in the seminar essay, we want to know your thoughts. And if we wanted to read the original paper's thoughts, then we would just read the original paper. So more generally, usually we cite papers for ideas, not for their words. So usually you would take a look at this paper, read it, understand it in your way, and then explain it in your way, and then just cite them for, hey, all of the ideas that I have from there, instead of taking their words. The second thing is that you don't have to become completely paranoid and cite for every little thing that you're using. And one example of this is that you don't need to cite common knowledge. So for example, if you want to talk about the class P, then you don't have to cite the source where you got the knowledge from what P is, because this is common knowledge. It's something that we just teach to undergrads and everyone knows about it. So on a plagiarism front, this would mean that nobody would ever assume that you want to say that this is your idea, what P is. This is clearly someone else's idea. There's also no need to cite ultra specifically. So if you have like a definition that consists of 3 points, you don't have to cite for every little thing where you got the idea from, but just, yeah, we don't have to do it that detailed. You can just say, okay, this notation follows these 2 papers, and then just write the thing that you want to write. Again, just don't spam these. So now that we know how to cite stuff, let's actually talk about how to write a good essay. And all of you have already been assigned a paper, the content of which should form the basis of your seminar essay. And then one of the most common questions is, if the authors of the original paper have already written down everything, what is your role in all of this? So what should you do now? Should you just take the original paper and just rephrase the whole thing into your essay? The answer will be no. But like, what can you bring to the table that the original paper didn't? And to basically get out of the way what you should and shouldn't do, let's first talk about how to approach writing a good essay. So the big picture of this is that the first step of writing a good essay is just to read and understand the original paper. Like really get into it, really take notes, think about whether you can answer questions about this, and yeah, get a good idea of what's happening. Then usually if you want to write something well, then you secondly want to create an outline of the essay first, so that you don't run into the problem that you start writing and then you later notice, oh, I don't have any structure in this and I'm just rambling. So what you need to define is what topics will be part of this essay. You should probably check these ideas with your supervisor. And how do you want to structure this essay? Just give a rough outline of, like in this section I want to explain this, and then in this section I will talk about this, etc. Then I guess the most important advice that we can give you is put the paper aside. So you have read this whole thing, you understood what's going on, now put the paper aside, don't look at it anymore, and then just start writing the essay. The advantage is that you won't be tempted to kind of reuse the original paper structure, you won't be tempted to reuse their exact explanation, and instead you can focus on coming up, how would you explain this to your reader? So really think about, how would I explain this topic to someone else? And then to be fair, if you've put the paper aside, usually it will happen that during writing your essay, you will notice that some of the explanations that you're giving, you don't necessarily know the perfect answers. So maybe you haven't perfectly understood the paper then. So if you encounter this, then first try to solve it yourself. So is this just a minor conceptual issue that you have? But if you notice that this is like a huge problem that you haven't understood yet, stop writing your essay, consult the original paper or other sources, and try to understand what you didn't understand before. Then after you've done this, close the paper again and then resume writing. One of the things that you may notice, in many cases, if you had problems understanding this, then chances are other people will also have problems with this. So maybe then it's a good idea to actually spend a few more sentences in your essay about this problem. Kind of make this one of your contributions of explaining this more clearly. So ideally, this is what you do. Read the paper, understand it, think about what you want to write into your essay and what kind of structure you want to use. Then put the paper aside, write your essay content, and whenever you're stuck, just reconsult the paper and try to figure out what you haven't understood yet. And to be fair, in some cases, it's actually fine to look into the paper again. So for example, if there's like a formal detail or a technical definition that you can't replicate like just by heart, then it's obviously fine to look into the paper and just use that. But in general, try to stick to this process. All right. So this serves the purpose of circumventing some of the problems that you sometimes have with seminar essays. So then we often have something like this. We have the original paper up here, and then you have this seminar essay that's kind of just parroting the original paper. And then often when we read this, we kind of notice, okay, the words are kind of different, but we can definitely map sentence by sentence where this came from the original paper. Okay, so then this first sentence may just be this first sentence here, and then we can just go through it with it, and then just, the formulations are different, but the content is kind of the same. But then if you have the same structure and the same content as the original paper, just paraphrase it, then like this essay has no value. Like any reader could just consult the original thing and they would probably be as well served as in your essay. It's also borderline plagiarism, because even though you're citing your source here, it kind of sounds like you're citing it for the general idea. But if you think about it, you didn't just take their general idea, you essentially took their content sentence by sentence. So you're essentially pretending that this kind of minimally changed version of their explanation is your original thought, your way of explaining it. So we would probably classify this as plagiarism. So how do you do better? Well, if you write a good seminar essay, then, on the one hand, you would write this in your own words. So you wouldn't look at the original paper for like words or sentences or structure, but you would try to explain it in your own structure and in your own way. Then you can also like provide good insights or good background information. And then lastly, don't just present the ideas that they have in the paper, but also discuss the details. You're not actually bound to just giving like a formal description of the thing that they already did, but go into depth. Talk about why things are the way that they are, talk about design decisions, talk about other ways that you could do it, or maybe talk about why a more naive way of doing it wouldn't work. And all of these are kind of great things that you can discuss in your seminar essay. So these are other ways of how you can improve upon the original paper. So if you don't want to fall into this trap of just rephrasing the original paper, you can first, the most important thing is to do it in your own words and put the paper aside, but then you can also add some more value to your essay. So for example, you can give better explanations than they did in the original paper. Again, they often have page restrictions, so they can't like give all of the explanations in depth. So why is this definition, this theorem, or this algorithm the way that it is? Could they have done differently and kind of just discuss this? Sometimes it's a good idea to improve upon the theoretical proofs that they did in the paper. You can add further explanations or even just write a proof that they omitted or just said is trivial or something. You can also go the other direction. So rather than adding details, you can try to just simplify the thing that they write in their paper. So one thing that we like to do there is to take simplified version of the thing that they're doing and kind of explain what are the drawbacks of this, and then take one step closer to their construction by adding a little bit of a tweak to it, and then explain why this tweak is there and what its role is. And then through this, you can kind of step by step construct their construction, and in each step kind of see why it is that you had to add this thing. And then often this is a good way of explaining it, because it's not like here's everything, but you can kind of get the thought process of how you arrive at the thing that they arrived at. Then another way to set your essay apart from the original paper is just adding related work. So you can look for other papers that are kind of doing similar things, and then just explain and compare to the paper that you're looking at. And then lastly, like a simple thing of improving is to give concrete examples. So let's say they have a theorem 2 in there. What is the actually useful application for this? People often, in the paper, they often just write, this is theorem 2, this is the statement, and then that's it. And then they kind of use it somewhere in the proof. But if you want to do it well, then you can also come up with examples or kind of give an intuition of what this theorem is supposed to say. And these examples come in all kinds of ways. So what does this complicated algorithm do if I just give it the simplest input in order to understand it better, etc. All of these are also listed on our website in the seminar FAQ. So this was a quick overview of what you can do to write a good essay. Now lastly, the other thing that you're going to do is to give a presentation about this topic. So the goal of this presentation is basically to explain your topic to the other students. And I guess your secret personal goal would be to show that you understand your topic well, because this will be a good factor in your grading. But mostly you should think about how can I explain my topic to other students so that they have something that they can learn. And talking about presentations, there are like a million things that we could talk about, how to do a good presentation, how not to bore the audience, but we'll just focus on the most important aspects that we thought about here. One important aspect of your presentation will be the presentation slides. In theory, you could just give your talk by just talking, and we would just all look at you and kind of listen to you. However, it will be really hard to explain something so that people can understand it well then, because usually people will need some sort of visual aid in order to follow your presentation. And then one of the things that sometimes happens is that you just put the full explanation on the slide, like up here. But obviously that's not a good idea, because while you're talking, people won't be able at all to read this, and then people end up needing to decide whether or not they want to follow what you're saying or what is written on the slides. And then usually they end up not being able to follow either. What you also don't want to do is to just put the full explanation on the slides and then just read the slides, because this is just pretty bad presentation style. The presentation is more about giving a good overview of the topic to people who may not have heard about it, without getting lost into the details that are kind of necessary in the seminar essay. And if you just put all of the text onto the slides, then you lose a lot of this ability to give better intuitions and stuff. So don't do it. So what you should do instead on your slides, just don't put full text, just put bullet points and keep them very short. So they should almost not be complete sentences in many cases. Then you can talk about these in more detail, right? So maybe some of the details that you would have on this bad slide here are just things that you can say to the audience during your presentation, if they're really important enough. And then also focus on brief ideas and maybe expand on them by talking about them. So the screen slide here has the advantage that it's pretty clean. I can easily listen to you and I can easily map what you're saying to the slide because it's pretty clean. So if you're, for example, talking about a theorem, then I will immediately know that you're talking about this thing here. It will be easy for me to follow. We also have some guidelines that we just have from experience that we gained. The first thing is that from our experience, usually you want to talk about roughly 2 minutes about every slide that you have. And in particular, this means that you can kind of compute how many slides should be roughly in your talk in order for your talk to reach the desired number of minutes. And the second thing about this is that you shouldn't overload slides. So if you have one slide that you talk 10 minutes about, then it's probably a good idea to start splitting the slide up. All of these are just rough guidelines, so it may be a good idea to deviate from them. While you're doing a presentation, if you're talking about something for more than 10 seconds, then mention this thing in the slide. This is because your audience will usually look for anchors in your slide and kind of try to map what you're saying to what is written on the slide. And so if you're talking a long time about something that's not on the slide, then people will kind of be lost. Something that almost always happens is that you will have more material than you have presentation time. And then somehow you need to handle this, right? And then one good way to handle this would be to talk only about parts of your topic or only simplified versions of your topic, but explain these very well. The bad thing would be to rush through everything, so then you have covered everything and all of the special cases, but nobody will understand what you're talking about at all, so this is the bad idea. So in your presentation, you will do a lot of talking. One thing that is like really, really important, and it's kind of underrated, you should practice this. Giving a talk takes a lot of practice, and you should know what you want to say on each slide. So don't be surprised by your own slides during the presentation. One thing that has helped me in the past a lot was just to start practicing this out loud. Because if you're just going through the talk in your head, then you lose all of the timing, so you can't really try how long it takes. And also you're just skipping over text that you really want to say. So practicing out loud, at least for me, has been really, really helpful. The second thing that's really important is to have a good and obvious structure. So for example, if you're going through all of your slides, through all of your contents, then one thing that you could do to give it like more structure, to better convey the structure that you have, is saying on each slide, what are we talking about now and how does it relate to the stuff that we've talked about before? Then explain whatever is on the slide. And then after the slide, give a very brief, like 1 or 2 sentence summary of what just happened. So that's it from me. I hope we kind of got the most important points across. If you have any more questions, ask your advisor. And yeah, I hope you have some fun in this seminar, and I'm looking forward to great talks. So see you.